Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at this virtual candlelight vigil. It's such a special occasion as today, July 5th, as far as I'm familiar, this is Interdependence Day. And so it's really great to be with you on a day that, after the 4th of July, when we celebrate and reflect on uh, all the parts that make the United States free and independent, and all the ways that we're not free and independent in this country. And this day, July 5th, to think about how we're actually all connected, and instead of independence, how we are actually all really must, in fact, work and be together to face all that the world has in store for us at current and moving forward. And when we think about the hard parts of life and all of the adversity and loss and overarchingly our mortal lives, we are here together in this virtual candlelight vigil to hold space for us to honor those who are no longer here, uh, parts of life that we've had to let go, and also to do that in community and celebrate the love that we have in our hearts for what matters most and that those who matter most, and do it in community with all of you. So thank you so much again. My name is Brad Wolf. I'm the executive director and founder of Reimagine. And as you know, we are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to helping people face the hard parts of life and transmute, channel, transform our challenging experiences into something healthy and something expansive that might move us forward, acknowledging all of the pain and the loss, but also realizing that um, there's healthy ways to metabolize uh, these parts of life, and we want to be part of that journey together. So here we are in this space with some incredible guests. Jimmy Greene, thank you for that saxophone introduction, and we're going to talk more about you as we move through this evening. But as we get going in this candlelight vigil, I want to just give you a couple pieces of background info. For one, we're going to be using the chat. And today we actually looks like we have a very intimate gathering, one of the more intimate candlelight vigils we've had heretofore. I know it's just right after that big holiday weekend, and we're in the middle of summer. But this is a really unique opportunity, I feel like, to be with some incredible people that we're getting to share this space with. And so I'm excited for this conversation to unfold and to invite all of you. If you're here, it means you're meant to be here for some reason. And whoever's here are the people that are meant to be here. And this is going to be just a really special evening, depending on where you are. But so let's get that chat going, and we'll be able to have time maybe for some discussion. But at first, let's warm up the chat, and maybe you can share um, where you're calling in from, dialing in from, and maybe also if you want to share um, something that this American holiday uh, of 4th of July or Independence Day or Interdependence Day, as today, July 5th, might be called. What's coming up for you today? Love to hear what's going on. And so yeah, get that chat warm. And then if you would love or are interested in closed captioning for this presentation, and would like to read along to the words that are being spoken, that nice little live transcript button that's highlighted here is a way to do that. Now, if you have any technical questions for us, you can also use the chat. And later on in the presentation today, we're going to be hosting, as we always do at these monthly vigils, an honor ceremony where we're going to use the chat to share the names of people that we would like to honor. And Jimmy will be leading us through that later today. So you'll use that for the honor ceremony as well. Now, please, if you're willing, given the size of this group, if you're willing to turn your camera on and show your face if possible, we can really make some great eye contact and have some real meaningful discussion here together today. So that would be nice, but it's at your discretion. And then ultimately, you'll be on mute, although later on, again, we may have time to unmute you to ask some questions of our guests this evening. So be ready for that if something's coming up for you, but there's no pressure to be on camera, to be off mute. Just be wherever you are and however you are, and we're grateful you are here with us for this vigil. And so just so you have a sense of where we're headed, we heard that gorgeous saxophone to kick off this ceremony, and then that was met with Zubin Desai's beautiful altar. Jimmy Greene's saxophone combined with Zubin's altar, which you'll see throughout the broadcast tonight as really the center of our space. Thank you, Zubin, for making that altar. And we're about to head into the ceremony aspect where we're going to engage in a candle lighting. So if you have a candle or you want to grab a candle, this could be your time to grab that candle, and we're going to come back and share a blessing over the candles. And then we're going to launch into a conversation with our featured guest today, Nicole Chung, who will introduce shortly in conversation with Andy Engel. And then we're going to move to that honor ceremony that I discussed. And then finally, we're going to follow that up with a candle extinguishing blessing, and then maybe some conversation with all of you. So we look forward to this. And without further ado, we're going to kick off this ceremony. And so I would love to invite my colleagues, Dara, Misha, and Zubin, to join us. And I think why don't we light the candles first, yeah? So we'll if you're ready for this, I'm going to strike a match myself, and we can get our candles going, and then my incredible Reimagine colleagues can lead us in this blessing. And as Dara, Misha, and Zubin each read this intention for this evening, we invite you to read along with us and share your voice. Even if we can't necessarily hear everyone, we can certainly feel it. So I turn it over to Dara to kick us off with this intention.
By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
All right. And so if you have a candle lit, we like to raise them up to the screen for a second, and even if not, if you're there and you can make eye contact with somebody else you see on the screen, or somebody's name, even you want to share a personal intention with somebody you pick out in this audience, and just ground yourself in someone's presence. I see Julie Orfield. I'm going to no pressure, but I'm just going to focus on you for about 15 seconds and just be in the space together. So why don't we each find somebody whose name or likeness and just hold some space for one another. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll keep those candles lit throughout the ceremony this evening until our candle extinguishing blessing later on. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our featured guest tonight, Nicole Chung. Nicole is the author of the new memoir, A Living Remedy, and the national bestseller, All You Can Ever Know. That book was named the best book of the year by NPR, or a best book of the year, uh, but it's still best book of the year, by the Washington Post, Time, and other media outlets. Nicole writes for the Atlantic, Times, Slate, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, New York Times Magazine, The Guardian, and GQ. She was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest and now lives in Washington, D.C. And Nicole is going to be in conversation with our very own Andy Engel, who is really leading the programming for this event at Reimagine tonight and has been responsible for the wonderful guests that you see before us. So Andy, I turn it over to you for this exquisite conversation, and thank you so much, Nicole, for being here and for all that you're doing in this conversation.
Thank you, Brad. Hi again, Nicole.
Hi, Andy.
Welcome again.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. It was wonderful to read your memoir. I felt like I really got to know you a bit. I got to know your parents, who clearly loved you dearly. That was very obvious in the way you wrote about them. And it may seem obvious. We usually ask our guests the question about who you're thinking about tonight at this vigil, who you're bringing. So let us know.
Yeah, of course. I mean, thank you again for the invitation, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm really honored to be in community with you all here tonight. I am thinking of my parents, of course. My father passed away in 2018 and my mother 2 years later in the spring of 2020, in the early weeks of the pandemic. But I'm also thinking about other family members I've lost. And my grandmother actually passed away, my mother's mother, a month before she did. And I recently lost an aunt I was very close to. And she was really my last link to that family, my adoptive family that I grew up in. So it's brought a lot of things back, as you can imagine. And I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be from a family and still be of that family, have been formed and shaped within it, and to still have the love of those people, but in a very different way, So yeah, so that's who I'm thinking of is really all of them tonight.
Thank you. Like I said, we really got to know the beautiful people that your parents were. But at the same time, this is a tough memoir to read. You describe such a brutal experience of having your father die quite suddenly. He was diagnosed with end-stage renal failure, and then 9 months later, after you bury him, your mother is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it's, as you mentioned, it was at the height of COVID. And I think a lot of us in this Zoom room are familiar about what that was like.
Of course.
To have a loved one who you could not interact with in the same way that and perform those normal rituals that we are so accustomed to. And then we get to know you, and we get to know about how other losses are layered with those two losses of your parents. It's such a complex grief that you are unfolding in this memoir. The guilt of not being with your mom at her bedside, or the financial trauma that your family experienced in terms of healthcare and insurance, which we'll get into, and the general inequities of living and dying in America, which for me is a call for Interdependence Day, and the experience of being a Korean American adopted by white parents, which really was the primary focus of your first memoir. But you touch on it here and in this new book. And you also mention your own chronic illness and living with that. So we'll try to cover as much as we can in the time that we have. It's a lot. But I mentioned this previous memoir, focused primarily on the experience of being an adoptee. And I'm curious, was it obvious to you as you were anticipating the losses of your parents. You know, you have many identities, and one of them is as a writer. And was that going on in your head, that as all of this was unfolding, like, oh, this is probably going to be a book at some point?
That's a good question. So my father passed away actually the year that my first book, All You Can Ever Know, came out. So it was, I remember having this conversation with my editor, like, should we try to somehow acknowledge, like, work that into the story? And publishing deadlines being what they were, there just was no way. I mean, things were moving, it was headed to the printer. And so, you know, that book went out into the world, and it's a book in which it is primarily focused on my experience as a transracial Korean adoptee and my search for my birth family and what I found after I searched. But in that book too, my adoptive parents, both of them, are still alive. And then I had this experience of going out on the road, like on tour, to talk about this book while grieving. And, you know, this is when the book was published. And so I still went out, you know, it was several months after my father died, but the same year. And I find myself talking about this book, and often talking about my childhood and my parents, and speaking about them in the present tense, plural, as though my father's still alive, which is just like sometimes a very painful, but also sometimes a very joyful experience, because I felt as though I was keeping his memory alive, not just me, but with all of these people I was talking to about him. And at the same time, I guess once he passed away, and it was somewhat of a sudden, unexpected death, but after years of illness. And in my father's case, his death was really sped by financial precarity, by lack of access to healthcare for many years, by really just a broken American safety net that failed him and failed my mother in various ways. I was really grappling with that. Like, one of the things I think everyone feels with grief at some point is anger. And I had expected to feel anger in addition to, you know, heartbreak, in addition to all the other feelings. But what really surprised me at that point was how much anger I felt at the injustice of how and when we lost him. I didn't believe then, and I still don't believe now, that my father's death at 67 was inevitable, you know. And both my mother and I felt very strongly that if he'd been able to get the help and the care, and specifically the medical care he needed earlier, you know, he might have had many more years. So there was this aspect of my grief that I was grappling with in a way, to me, that was unexpected. I hadn't expected to feel this, like, I don't know, this need to reckon with a fundamental American inequality, you know, while grieving my father. And then I thought, well, it's such a common experience. And I remember a friend telling me after he died, like, this is such a common American death. You know, how many people in this country die for similar reasons all the time? And I was just thinking that this is very common, unless you're fantastically wealthy in this country. You know, so often you do face illness and crisis and grief without all the support or resources you or your family need. And at the same time, it is still our job to try to care for each other, to love each other, and be in community with each other, despite often feeling as though we're doing it alone or without all the support we need. And I thought, if this happened to my family, and I know it is common, maybe it is something that it would help other people to read about. And so that's when I started thinking, okay, perhaps there's a grief story here. Perhaps I'll write, you know, some kind of meditation about grief, you know, that really is also about this inequality, about this type of loss. And then, as you mentioned, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and everything changed. In terms of the book, I hadn't gotten very far into it, but I knew I would have to stop and focus on her. And if I ever managed to write the book, it would need to be reimagined, right? Because, no pun intended, because I mean, my life had changed. I was going to be writing about the loss of both parents at once, something I'd never imagined. You know, I never imagined losing them so close together. And then I would also never have anticipated the pandemic, and the fact that at a time when I so badly wanted to be with her, my access to my mother was really limited. And so then it became a very different type of story. And I realized my way into writing it would be with this relationship with my mom kind of as the foundation, because she was so much the family storyteller before I was. She'd always been this kind of bridge between me and my father. Like she was the one who told me stories about him because my father didn't like to talk about himself in that way. And it was many, many months after she died before I could write again. I mean, I took a very long break, but I guess this is a long-winded way of answering your question, but I had intended to write about grief and about grieving in America specifically, and what it can mean for especially like under-resourced families and communities. And then when my mother was diagnosed with cancer and the pandemic hit, it sort of became a different book.
What really is resonating with me is hearing about the power of storytelling. Like, I didn't expect you to say that going out on the book tour, having the opportunity to tell those stories about your parents was providing comfort. And the fact, that this is a beautiful work of storytelling that you've created. I want to go back to the inequities that you were touching on. And I found it to be such a powerful phrase that you used to describe your father's death as negligent homicide by the state. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of talk in the end of life space about the universal aspects of death. But I think what is not discussed as much is that death is not an equalizing experience. It may be universal, but it's not equalizing. And I would like to hear more from you about how do financial insecurity and financial trauma color grief when you are mourning someone's death?
I mean, this is so hard for all of us to talk about, right? Because I think many people here probably know and have experienced how hard it is in our culture, like our society, to really talk about deep, painful losses, and how when you're grieving, even though it is this universal experience, we will all lose someone if we have not already, it can feel as though you're the only one or the only one that you know. And you might encounter this. I remember feeling after my father died, like surprised at how people I would have thought would be able to talk about it or listen. It was like really a struggle. And to a degree, I really understand that. Like we just aren't good about acknowledging and making space for grief in our culture, especially like, when the first few days, the first week, or whatever your bereavement leave, if you're lucky enough to have one, is over. We're not good too at talking about living with grief. And then, your question was about the financial weight and that burden. And I think that also there's a real struggle many people to talk about money in a frank way. Kind of regardless of your background, I think it's a topic that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And at first glance, it might seem like it doesn't have a place in a discussion about emotion, about grief, about these deep losses. But if you think about it, there's so much about like illness, whether it's terminal or not, or, other health issues, or certainly end of life issues and care, elder care. We have an elder care crisis in our society. Like there's so much to do with all of that, where your options really are ruled by what kind of assets you have access to, or whether or not people are insured, or whether or not they might have rainy day savings or long-term health care. And I think because too, there is such a focus on individuality and individual responsibility in our society, we turn these issues into, well, that's a family issue. That's an individual issue. That's what a child owes their parents, or what a parent owes their child. And we don't necessarily think about how collective and systemic they really are. And so hopefully without like preaching, I wanted this to be a topic that I discussed openly in the book, because my parents' financial situation, how much they had at their disposal, how much I had at my disposal, or how little, all these things determined what choices were available to them, and how much I could really help and support them. And there was this very like crushing moment when my mother was in hospice, and I was trying to calculate, because I was managing her affairs and her finances and supporting her financially at that point. And I was paying home health care bills for like thousands per week. And I just remember doing the math and thinking like, okay, we have this much. And when it's gone, it's gone. And Medicaid won't be enough. And so I don't know what we'll do. I both like wanted her to live forever and had no idea how I would afford, how we would afford like this long-term healthcare situation. So this is just one example, right? But I think we have to talk about these things because people are facing these struggles every day. And we often leave individuals and families and communities to feel as though it's all on me. Like I have to figure this out myself. If there's one message I hope people get from my book, it's that, you're not alone in this, even when it feels like you are. But it's a real challenge for so many families.
You have another gem of a sentence describing this experience that I'm going to quote here, and I'm going to have you read some of your book later on too. But you say, "I am an expert at grieving under capitalism."
I didn't expect that to resonate with people, I think, the way it has, but many people have commented on it since the book came out. And I remember feeling my father's death was the first major loss of my life. And I didn't know what was typical. I didn't yet know also that there is no typical with grief and there's no timeline and it's never linear. But I remember thinking, well, how much time can I take off? And at the time, my company didn't have a bereavement policy. So it was one of those, just ask for what you think you need. And I had no idea what I needed. I was not okay for many months, not even close, but I knew I couldn't take off months, certainly not unpaid. With my mother too, I remember at one point when she was ill, again, it was like just a really difficult time. And it had become kind of a second full-time job, me managing her care and her, all of her affairs and talking to doctors. And I just remember thinking like, it would be helpful to take some time off work, like family leave. And then in the same moment, I realized that was impossible because I was financially supporting her at that point. She hadn't been able to work for a long time. And so at this moment when you can even know what would be like the better, healthier course for you, and like in our culture, be sort of unable to do that. But grieving under capitalism, there was so much just like knuckling through and feeling like I always had to try to at least pretend to be okay and functional and professional or whatever for the sake of everybody else. And it was just like grinding me down. Like the amount of energy I had to put into just trying to be okay enough to like work and manage my team and stay professional. It was just so hard. And I just hadn't seen a lot of discussion kind of around that either. Again, not so much in like grief stories that I'd read anyway. So it was another thing that I really wanted to bring into the book.
I want to hear more from you and with you reading the book. So I want to set up a section for you. I think you are a wonderful painter of all the colors that make up grief. You talk about, that this is something that so many people go through, that you're not alone. But at the same time, I think each person's grief experience is so unique. So one aspect of grief that people often talk about is anger. I think you describe that really well. And I find it interesting how you described anger as a refuge from all of the sorrow that's associated with grief. So maybe you could read from us this passage on what I have here in your book on pages 84 to 86.
Is there a particular sentence you want me to start with?
Well, I think bottom of 84, if you could set this up for us, during the service. Yeah.
Sure. And this chapter is focused on my father's funeral. My parents were both Orthodox Christians. They converted to Orthodoxy after I left home. So it wasn't a faith tradition I shared, but they both had these really beautiful Orthodox funerals. So there's some of that here. So I'm sorry, you said bottom of 84 to 86?
Actually to 86, where it ends with, she was a warrior, even in grief.
Okay. During the service, my parents' former priest talked about my father with great respect and affection. He said he felt Dad loved people beyond their merits, a sentiment to which I could relate. While Dad and I sometimes disappointed each other, our love was never in question. And he usually thought better of me than I thought of myself. Their parish priest spoke of the daily pain Dad had lived with, and how in the end, he believed he'd allowed this suffering to bring him closer to the God he would soon meet. This, he concluded, is why my father ultimately knew peace at his death. It did not find him unready. He was intimately familiar with his body's weaknesses, his own mortality, and had used his suffering to focus his mind and prepare his soul. Of course, said the priest, he couldn't know the day or the hour, but he knew he would soon meet our Lord, and he prepared for that meeting. I couldn't have been more surprised if the priest had walked over and slapped me, although years of church training helped me hold the line. I supposed he could speak with some authority when it came to my father's true feelings about faith, life, and death. But if what he said was true, why had he seen it when my mother and I hadn't? Had Dad truly spent the past weeks, maybe months, preparing to die? If he'd known it was imminent, why didn't he warn my mother? Why didn't he tell me, his only child, so I could try to say goodbye? I stared at my father in his handmade casket, and the sudden flare of anger I felt was so unlike sorrow that I let myself take momentary refuge in it. If you really knew and didn't tell us, I thought, that was a real dick move, Dad. He did look peaceful, as if he welcomed death or had at least been ready for it. When we approached to say our final goodbyes, my mom, mostly cried out by then, put her arm around my shoulders. Her solid warmth, a familiar comfort, as always. Don't despair, she told me. This is our hope in the resurrection. The words might have upset me, coming from anyone else in that church, anyone else in the world. But I felt her sorrow as something deeper and more powerful than my own, a great river spilling its banks. I couldn't help but feel awed by her abiding faith in what she saw as my father's victory over death. She was a warrior, even in grief.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm curious to hear more about spirituality and grief. And I'm curious to hear about the kind of reassurances that you experienced in ritual. And despite the fact from what I've read in your memoir that you're not much of a churchgoer, a regular churchgoer now, but I'm curious, having grown up with these traditions, I believe you were raised in a Catholic church, and then your parents switched over to the Orthodox tradition. So I'd love to hear more about the comforts of ritual and ceremony for you.
Yeah, so it's funny, like it was one of those things I was really nervous to write about in that chapter in the book, because I feel as though I have nothing figured out when it comes to religion and spirituality, and I have kind of a complicated, we'll call it fraught relationship, I guess, with my childhood faith. And at the same time, I cannot deny it still has some kind of hold over me, and it's hard to define what it is. But my father's death was one of those moments where, even though I didn't share my mother's, rock solid faith, I remember feeling so grateful that these rituals and her community, like that little church community they were part of, which I write more about later, but that these things held her, and that she drew so much comfort and so much strength from them. I think the word community gets tossed around so much, sometimes it starts to lose meaning, but I really saw it in the way her church friends drew close around her after my father died, and when she was sick and in hospice, the things they did for her, it was really just kind of love in action. And I was so grateful that was there for her. I think now, the moments when I find myself, I don't know, like reaching toward something like faith again or ritual, a lot of that is because it will always be this link to my parents, you know, to how they raised me. My mom taught me to say the rosary when I was like little. And I still, as a person who's not quite sure what she believes, I mean, I will still fall back on that. I will still say those prayers, you know, go through those, like those rote prayers and rituals in times of real difficulty. And I think it's also me reaching for my mother, you know, and my father in those moments, because it was really a part of my connection to them. So I don't have a lot of answers about my own faith or spirituality, but I mean, I saw how much theirs gave my parents, and I have a real respect and a real gratitude, you know, for that community that they were part of.
I think what made sense to me when you wrote about this Christian concept of suffering, and that it can be purposeful, that it's a tool can help us connect with others.
My parents really both believed that. I am no great fan of suffering myself. You know, who is? It's not something we seek out. But I did, growing up Catholic. I mean, I heard stories about saints, about mystics, you know, about people who really believed that suffering could be redemptive, and that it could be what you're saying, something that unites us with everybody else who suffers. And that is something that I do think is a very powerful idea, and something that both my parents strongly believed in, is that, you know, they both suffered tremendously when they were ill. And I don't think it was easy. I don't think they loved that, or that they always bore it, you know, patiently, like who would? But what I remember seeing in both of them at a certain point, like they were just able to, that suffering, the physical part of it, I don't think it ruled their lives. I think that they were, it was partly because of their faith and partly because of who they loved. But like toward the end of their lives, for both of them, it was like suffering was always there, but it was in second place. And they were focused on the love they had for each other, for me, I mean, for God, for their community. I don't know that that would be my reaction. I can't say. I've never gone through something like that, but it was really theirs. And I don't think that they did think it was purposeless what they were going through. You know, I think they did feel some kind of communion with other people who suffered, other people who were sick.
I want to get back to your rich, complicated, diverse family. I found the phrase "recovering a lost treasure" to describe reconnecting with your sister Cindy so moving. And I'm curious, when you did connect with Cindy as a young adult, did that ultimately help you with your grieving of your adoptive parents?
Yeah, so I reunited with my biological sister Cindy, my full Korean sister, when I was in my like mid to late 20s. She's 6 years older than me. We are still very close. It's been, gosh, I mean, it's been a long time that we've been reconnected. And she is like, it's been one of the greatest, most unexpected gifts of my life, since I grew up knowing nothing about my Korean birth family. Cindy grew up believing I was dead. You know, that's what my parents had told her. And so for both of us, it was just this wonderful, overwhelming surprise. And she did get to meet and get to know, and I think get to love my adoptive parents, you know. And so I'm very grateful they had the chance to meet. And like, she came to my father's funeral, you know, one of the few family members who was actually able to be there. And it just meant so much that she was there for my mother, my adoptive mom, and me at that time. She is now like the only family I have left, you know. I'm married, I have children, but like my family, I guess my family of origin, you would say.
By the way, Nicole, we had a previous guest, the wonderful writer Armistead Maupin, best known for Tales of the City. And he has a memoir called Logical Family. And I love the way he differentiates between biological and logical.
That's really fun. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that one before. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, all that to say, I think yeah, I wasn't expecting Cindy to become like close with my parents or to be this like great source of support to them too, but she really was. It's just like how open and how generous she is. I don't know. I'm very, very grateful that I have her, you know. She's actually coming to visit me in a couple of weeks. So that's I'm
Nice.
looking forward to it. Yeah.
I want to continue talking about race. As a white kid growing up, I assimilated the idea that it was just not polite to talk about someone's race, in my generation, to be colorblind was kind of like a badge of pride. And you also have written that growing up, you didn't talk about race with your white parents. So we're talking about this death loss. But I also want you to address a bit, about losing roots and growing up in a state like Oregon, which is not known for its racial diversity.
No, it's not.
And in fact, increasingly, we're all learning about the history of white supremacy in Oregon. I'm just curious for you to share more about your experience of loss as an adoptee.
Yeah, I was actually surprised how much losing my adoptive parents brought up like what I call or think of as my original loss of my first family through adoption and really my cultural roots, I guess. A friend of mine who's also an adoptee said to me once, adoptees are like experts in grieving. And I think by that, it was just an acknowledgement that like, yes, we gain new families through adoption, but for that to happen, you first lose everybody else that you're connected to, not through death, but like, it's a different type of separation, right? And I've been really fortunate to be able to reconnect with some of my birth family and to kind of try and reclaim some of what I've lost. But there's so much that like I'll never really truly regain. I don't know. And then just like losing my parents kind of brought up that sort of well of grief that I have around those initial losses. And it also like affected me in this other way of like, I remember after my dad died, a friend who didn't know I was adopted said to me, well, you'll always see him like in yourself or in your kids, like, he'll live on through all of you. And I do really believe in living memory. I think that's a powerful thing, but she meant like actual physical features. She meant like, there will be a resemblance. You'll see that like expressions or whatever in your kids. And of course I don't, right? So it was also just this feeling of like, when I lost them, what does it even mean to be an adoptee whose adoptive parents are gone? Like, I'm obviously still adopted. That's still an important part of my identity. And the fact that they were my parents still shaped me into who I am. But like that relationship, it's not over, but it's changed. It's changed so much. So it's like, I'm sort of figuring out what my orphaned adoptee identity will be. It's hard and it's kind of lonely work because, as I mentioned, I don't have a lot of family left. So like, there's no one else who really remembers my childhood. And I'm kind of carrying so many memories of my parents, especially like on my own. That's kind of hard, so these are just some of the things I think. You're already a little bit isolated as a transracial adoptee, and then grief can be another type, or can feel like another type of isolation. But I do try to remember, I'm not really alone. But yeah.
Thank you. I want to shift now to grief and death education. I liked what you wrote about encouraging your youngest child to touch your father's face at his funeral. It's so physical, so tactile. It makes everything so real. And I'm curious what additional advice you might have for other parents to help kids prepare for and navigate loss.
Yeah, I know too that open casket wakes and funerals are not part of everybody's traditions, but like for my parents and for me, it was very common. And I don't actually remember if I encouraged my younger daughter to touch my father's beard or if she just did. But I write this in the book, but my younger daughter, who's even younger than, she's autistic. And this was the first big loss. And I remember just trying to explain what death was to her. And it was this very fuzzy, abstract concept when at that age, especially, she could really only grasp like the concrete things. She'd encountered death in like books and movies, but it's not the same thing as somebody that you know. And I remember just trying to explain it to her with words, and every time feeling like either I was coming up short or like there was just no way to bridge like that gap in understanding. There was something about going to his funeral, seeing him in that casket, like touching his beard, realizing he wasn't getting up, realizing he wasn't making a joke to try to make her laugh. There was something about that experience and that like physical experience that made it real for her in a way that none of my words had managed to do, I think, till that point. And so that was incredibly meaningful. And, I think what different children might need when they're going through a loss or watching a parent go through a loss, of course, like every child's different, right? They're all going to have different needs, and it's going to depend a lot on their age and their understanding and their history. But I think there are some universal things people can think about, and that's just like being willing to grieve openly in front of our children, I think, is actually like really huge. And it sounds so obvious, but it's really hard to do when you're used to being this parent in control, like, and thinking I have to be strong for you, or, what's going to happen if my child sees me cry or sees me, really deeply grieving. I remember being kind of terrified at what impact it could have on my kids seeing me really grieve. But I think it was good for them ultimately. Not just the experience of going to my father's funeral, and experiencing those rituals, or it was very different when my mother died. We had to live stream her funeral, but it was still something we did as a family and had tried to have our own rituals around that grief during the pandemic. But it was so important for them to see and participate in that, and to know grief is normal. I mean, it's hard and it's painful, but it's so normal. And just like seeing us feel, I think, can help them feel okay, like expressing what they're feeling, and can make them feel it's okay to ask questions, can make them feel it's okay not to be okay. So I don't know, I think the main thing is just helping kids understand it's hard and it's painful. It is part of life for all of us at some point. It's normal. It's something that we, no one seeks out grief, but it is something ultimately that we all go through, and we go through together.
Thank you. It's almost time to wrap up with you, but I do want you to read one more excerpt. It's from chapter 15. Okay. You have an abridged version, as far as I
do. I'm worried it's going to be too long. Should I shorten it further?
I think it's okay. I think it's okay, Nicole. We've got 5 minutes, but if you could just set it up a bit. I know this is, your mother became too sick to walk Buster, her dog.
Yes.
You begrudgingly do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think that's enough of a setup, go right ahead.
This is on one of my visits home before the pandemic, when my mother was dying, and my father had passed away recently. It's about homegoing, really. It's late morning, the fog burning off to let the green hills peek through, and I'm walking my mother's dog Buster, up one side of each narrow street, down the other, past row after row of mobile homes. Our circuit through the park takes 15 minutes, moving as briskly as Buster's short little legs will allow. As we near my mother's house, I turn left and walk 50 or so paces to the wood and chicken wire fence you can see from her living room window, one of several separating her neighborhood from the farmland. I like to stop and linger here to see the mountains if they're out. There used to be another draw, a pair of horses that grazed in the tall grass beyond the fence, and I suspect Buster would bark at them if they were still here. His growls and barks can be unpredictable, but he's the beloved pet of my mother's widowhood, and we've gotten used to each other. Mom had been anxious about having a pet in Dad's later years. She worried he would trip over a dog or cat, unsteady as he could be on his feet. But if it were only up to her, I knew she'd always have a dog in the house. After Dad died, I asked her, why not get another dog, thinking of the pets we'd had when I was a child, and all the dogs of Mom's girlhood that she told me stories of. I was surprised when she shrugged and said something about dogs needing a lot of time and attention. But sure enough, a few months later, I got a picture of her holding a little black dog who looked very pleased to be in her arms. I had to laugh when she told me his name. Buster has always been my mom's go-to moniker for any young mischievous male child, related to her or not. She calls girls of the same type young lady. Buster the dog might as well be her child. He's spoiled and completely devoted to her. I sometimes wondered if Buster knows how sick she is, if his sharp little nose sniffed out the truth about the cancer that's killing her. Since she became ill, he shadowed her closely, sleeping in her bed at night, keeping watch. She frets over what will happen to him, though she isn't ready to talk about where he might live when she's gone. For now, all I can tell her is that we'll make sure her dog is all right. Mom hasn't been able to walk Buster for weeks. I haven't had a dog since childhood, and I'm unused to planning my day around the needs of one. But I'm glad to have a reason to get out and move, to breathe cold, fresh air, to look at something beyond the walls of my mother's house. The pavement's wet from the morning shower, and Buster and I take detours around the biggest puddles. The mountains are at once immense and homely, and seem so close, I can almost imagine running right into them if we could cross the neighboring field. Every time I return, it's the Cascades that greet me first, from the window of a small plane. Without words, without answers, they offer me the same peace they always have. I can feel my mind ease a fraction, although my anxieties are slower to dissipate than the strands of fog clinging to the base of the hills. Other than my family, there's little I miss, feel nostalgic for in this sheltered valley. But the way I love these mountains, high and stark amid cloud cover and sun-shot sky, is as simple as the comfort of a dog, the promise of an Oregon rain shower. The friendly ranges encircle and welcome me, rising above green and gold fields, too vast to be outgrown. They make me feel like I might still have a place here. My dad loved this view. I can picture him sitting outside on the patio wearing a baseball cap and his favorite blue Hawaiian shirt, listening to the radio and watching the hills emerge from the clouds. The day we buried him, there was a sun shower, and we gathered outside to see a rainbow arching over the peaks. Some hours later, when the overcast sky gave way to a fiery orange and rose sunset, one of the best I could ever remember seeing, my mom sighed and squeezed my hand. Quite a send-off, she said. My father never feels closer or farther away than when I return to this place to find him gone. Now I'm walking a dog he never met, wondering if he knows what my mother's facing, what we're going through without him. I turn around, the mountains a reassuring wall at my back, and let Buster lead us home for lunch.
May we all find more comfort in nature and all creatures, great and small and spoiled. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks to you both. Please, thank you, Connie, in the chat for sharing that heart. And if anyone else is willing to share some gratitude with Nicole, I know we all feel so much gratitude, Nicole, for your the conversation, for your vulnerability, and for the honesty and authenticity and truth in that vulnerability that you're sharing forward, and just so grateful for you and holding space for all those that you've lost, and just thank you. It's just exquisite work, and I look forward to following along on your journey and reading your works, and hopefully everyone out here does the same.
Thank you so much.
And now it's really my honor to turn to Jimmy Greene and bring Jimmy into the fold here. Jimmy is a native of Hartford, Connecticut, and is one of the most respected saxophonists of his generation, if not all the generations. His two previous solo releases, one of which was nominated for a Grammy, celebrated his 6-year-old daughter, Anna Marquez Greene, whose life was tragically taken over a decade ago at Sandy Hook Elementary School. So certainly we honor Anna in this space here. Jimmy and his groups have performed at the Jazz Standard in New York, the Newport Jazz Festival, and at clubs and festivals outside the US, including Russia, Italy, France, Israel, Uruguay, and Brazil. He's appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, CBS This Morning, The Meredith Vieira Show. He's also performed and presented in churches, faith-based conferences, and art symposiums throughout North America. And Jimmy has appeared on over, and this boggles my mind as a musician myself, on 75 albums, and has toured and or recorded with Horace Silver, Ron Carter, Harry Connick Jr., Dee Dee Bridgewater, and so many jazz luminaries. Jimmy, thank you so much for being part of this gathering with us today. And I really do, before you lead us in the honor ceremony, which is your task. I mean, I'm just feel so lucky to be in your presence. Obviously you've gone through a lot in your own journey. Maybe before I just ask you a question or two, I just wonder if you have any reflections for any of for this space that we're holding here, or anything that you've heard so far.
Yeah, I just really appreciate being invited to join you all this evening. And this is a wonderful space for reflection and for connection. And I just want to thank Nicole for sharing so much of herself through her work and her words and her conversation with Andy. I think grieving and grief in our country is something that is, like, as Nicole said, that we're not really good at talking about it and making space for it a lot. So I'm really glad that this space exists for that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you've obviously been through your own grief journey, and um, you know, we, we haven't at Reimagine had the opportunity to talk to somebody who's had to live through what you did and your family's had to go through. And so, if willing, would love to hear any reflections on just that experience overall. But if that's too broad, would personally love to hear also just your relationship with music, and how your relationship with music, how that relationship carried forth and shifted or changed, or was there, did it support you, or did it something you had to put away? Like, how did music as a channel for your own life play a role in your own lived experience through your daughter's death?
Well, music is something that has been a part of my life from the beginning. I'm sure all of us can say that. I've never run into somebody who says I don't really like music. So music is a big part of how we connect as humans. It's a language, I feel, that can cross all kind of boundaries, whether they be national boundaries or ethnic boundaries or cultural boundaries. So I'm very thankful to have been given the opportunity to grow and to develop as a musician. So in the context of losing my daughter in the way in which we did, um, that has always been a part of who I am and how I relate to the world, how I relate to my surroundings, how I relate to how I channel my emotions and my thoughts. Uh, a lot of it, obviously, through words, but music is another language that I'm very thankful to be able to speak in. So Now, that being said, it takes a lot of physical um, work to be able to um, express yourself in that way. A lot of physical work as far as in hours per day and days, every day per week and every week in a year and years and years of diligent practice and study and the physical work that it takes to perform on an instrument or instruments at a level where such expression is even possible. So, in the midst of the early days of grappling with this horrendous uh, crime that had been committed against my daughter and her classmates and her school community, I didn't have the physical ability uh, to to do those things that I would normally have done without thinking. But the music was always there. I was always singing something in my head. I was always thinking of relating some feeling to sound. So although I wasn't able to physically execute it on my instrument, I was the music was always running through my head. The musical thought, the musical connection is always there. So, but it took time, to physically be able to have the strength to commit to doing the work to bring that expression out, I guess, is how I would answer that.
And what about, the music that then became that you wrote or composed thereafter? Did that in maybe in honor of or transforming that your experience or channeling, maybe not transforming, how did that manifest?
Well, it's interesting that writing music for me is such a joyful challenge. Um, and I'm sure Nicole, writing words, writing, words, uh, it's a joyful challenge. It's telling a story, and sometimes you look, I'm sure as writers would look at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper. I sometimes I look at a blank screen. I use music notation software, a blank sheet of music paper, and it's a miracle that this story can be told, and that the inspiration happens, and that you learn ways to hone it and to spin, from one theme to the next, from one idea to the next, and make it cohesive and make it work. Um, I had always written music about the music I wrote. Obviously, as a quote unquote jazz musician, one of your main tasks is to learn a lot of repertoire that other people write, a lot of very specific songs, and be able to play them in a variety of different ways. Um, but as far as writing music, I always wrote music that was very personal, whether it would be about a relative or my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. It was always very personal. So I wrote music about my kids before, as they were born. I wrote tunes for them, when I met them for the first time. Um, and they were always a big source of inspiration. So upon my daughter's murder, writing songs for her wasn't a new thing for me. It just was a very different thing because her life was not still unfolding, at least on this earth, it wasn't. So, and there was such a barrier, a wall of grief, and like I said, inability to execute things physically. But once over time, um, I was able to start doing these things. The music kind of just came pouring out, and I had dabbled in writing songs with lyrics before, but since my daughter loved to sing, she had a beautiful voice, even at 6 years old. Well, she would correct me and say, "No, Dad, I'm 6.5." So even at 6.5 years old, she had a beautiful singing voice. I figured, I need to write some lyrics to some songs because this is what she would have really done, So the music came pouring out, and some lyrics came pouring out as well.
Hmm. Well, hopefully, I know Andy will share a link to your music, so we can all make sure that everyone here has the opportunity to listen. And I guess we'd love you to lead us in the honor ceremony part, which is, but we could talk to you. Honestly, I could certainly talk to you for a very long time as someone who, myself, am doing this work, having played music by the bedside of somebody that I loved for a number of years upon their passing. But it's certainly very, like to say that we all, you can drown in an ocean and you can drown in 3 inches of water. And I feel like, not to compare people's passings and deaths, but just to have a child taken away in the way that you did is really certainly an ocean. And just really honor your being and the experience you've had to go through, and I think at Reimagine, our dream and our hope in the world for us as an organization to be able to facilitate people finding their own music, their own channels, and how might we point people to some of those channels that are healthy. We talk about therapy as like being, what do you do after something hard? Well, we go to therapy. But there's so many ways we believe that we can channel our pain, and music is one of those ways. But there's so many others, and it can be as simple as telling somebody you love them. It can be taking some time for yourself to sleep, to watch to grieve, to proactively grieve and say I'm grieving, and that's okay. And there's just so many channels, and we don't feel like there's awareness of those opportunities. And so your story and in your life kind of helps showcase that, and inspires really all of us. And so I guess if this is not part of your as our lead into this next part where we're going to all share the names of those we love, I'm curious, just as we head into that part, if there's some wish that you have for all of us or for the world, kind of in light of your experience, that you could share with us, that we could try to move toward.
I actually closed my intro to the honor ceremony with a wish. So
Then
perfect segue there, Brad.
I felt it.
All right. So I just want to start by saying, once again, I'm grateful for this community of grievers and those who support grievers. Oftentimes we're the only ones who have gone through a traumatic loss or a tragic loss, who have insight into what we've been through and what it takes to keep going. Thank you to everyone at Reimagine, to Nicole, and to everyone who's joined this Zoom, for your time and your energy and your presence to be present here for this event. And I pray this can be a gentle time for connection and healing for everyone. So social media is good for many things. It's bad for some things too. But one of the things it's good for is memories. It reminds you of what you did or what you posted about a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So exactly 10 years ago, I stepped into the social media reminded me, I stepped into the recording studio to make an album that should never exist. But the album was essential for me to do. It was to be a tribute to my murdered 16-year-old daughter, Anna Grace Marquez Greene. 7 months earlier, she was killed in her first grade classroom, along with her classmates and teachers at Sandy Hook Elementary School, as Brad mentioned. And as I mentioned earlier, for weeks afterward, I was physically unable to do the routine things that I would do on the course of a normal day: practice the saxophone, sit at the piano and write music. It was through the encouragement and support of many communities and Nicole used that word earlier, community, and it does get thrown around a lot. For me, community is so integral to the reason why I'm still standing today. Many communities came to support my family and me. Not just my immediate family and friends. Obviously, those are huge pillars of support. The music community, my academic community, my colleagues at the university where I teach, and colleagues that I've taught with and served with along the way in academia, our rich, robust, supportive community of faith, and neighbors that we have from near and far have been integral, like I said, in our ability to stand. At that time, and even until now, the words of two men in particular that were really impactful for me. And the first was my father, who only days after my daughter's murder in my home recounted his own deep sense of grief after his mother's sudden passing from a heart attack when he was in his 20s, before I was born, and warning me not to act out negatively to those around me, as he felt he had done in his younger days. He said these words to me: "You will rightly mourn your daughter's loss for some time. That's only natural. But in the midst of your grief, don't ever lose sight of all the beauty you have surrounding you right now." In my life until that point, I had never heard my father speak about feelings at all. Never mind his own feelings, his own grief. His words have been so impactful to me and have inspired me more than he could ever know. And the second person is a generous and caring recording industry executive named Norman Chesky. He called me, and in those days, our tragedy was widely publicized, and as you may remember, and many people were trying to capitalize on our tragedy in many different ways. So I became very wary of anyone approaching me for anything that had anything to do with money. But this gentleman called, and he offered to donate all of the fees associated with the production of an album, all the recording costs, to pay all the musicians, to pay the engineers, to pay to make a master recording, essentially. Whenever I would choose to do so, just because he felt like, knowing my music as he had, that I would do something that would be very impactful for not just the recording community or the jazz community, but for the world at large. And he, in turn, would not take or accept a penny of royalties in return. And he also said, if you don't believe me, I will have my lawyers draw up a contract that says just that. So, just amazing, unbelievable generosity. So the album that resulted is called Beautiful Life. It was released in 2014. And the photo on the cover is a photo of my two children, arm in arm, looking out over a river that was in the back of our home at the time. And my wife took the picture, my wife Nelba. More about her a little later. But it's a gorgeous moment, and I was able to choose all the music and write all the music and arrange all the music on the album. And it could have been filled with messages of the righteous anger I often felt and still do feel, because my daughter was murdered. It could have been a musical call to greater political action and gun violence prevention advocacy, things that we absolutely did become involved in and still are to some degree, beginning in the months after Anna's murder. Instead, though, I wanted to really reflect uh, not just the way I wanted to honor my little girl and uh, have the album's message focus on the way she lived, not just on the way she died. Our faith and our family are paramount in that message. And tonight, I just want to take a moment here as we begin this honor ceremony and lean into the beauty that defined my daughter's life. To ground myself right here in the knowledge that her beautiful life, although brief, was a miracle. And to remember her not just for the way she died, but how she lived. The amazing, funny, brilliant, thoughtful, talented little human that she was, remembering the love and concern she expressed daily for me, my wife, her mom, her brother, and all those around her. That's the beauty that inspires me to move in meaningful ways every day. To try to reflect that beauty in my art, to love my wife and son deeply as she did, and to lead with love when I'm mentoring aspiring young musicians. In doing so, I really feel like I'm keeping her memory alive, which is very important for me. I pray for all grievers that as you journey from day to day, to please remember my dad's words, a man who never talked about feelings. Please take a deep breath with me right now. And focus on all the beauty that surrounds you even today. Now, in the chat box, which is at the top or bottom of your screen, please write the name of the person you'd like to honor. And please share anything you'd like to say about them.
Wow. Everyone and Jimmy and thank you so much for just those last 10 minutes of being together, and what those 10 minutes together and what went on in the chat just now signifies, for all of us who are bearing witness and participating, together in this experience. I think is just, there is something about the music that you played, and its combination with your story and life and pain, and then the pain and love that those of us who contributed on the in the chat are feeling for those of that we're sharing. Um, just something beyond. I don't know. That's what I'm feeling right now, and just want to say, uh, just how special it is to be in community with all the people here in this sacred space that's been created because of people's vulnerability, and courage, and music. And so, um, and I say music in the broadest sense, of music. So, maybe we should take a deep breath. Jimmy, what, will you lead us in another deep breath, perhaps?
Absolutely. Breathing deeply is essential to what I do on the instrument, and it's essential for grievers to take a moment and take a step back and to just center ourselves in our bodies and gather ourselves and to just, participate in the air coming in and the air coming out. So let's take a deep breath together.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. And now we want to, just come together as we move through this part of the ceremony and reflect on this moment in time together, and Jimmy's words and Nicole's words, and um, what they mean for all of us in the music and the altar. And I'm gonna pull back the. Uh, let's see, what am I gonna? I'm gonna pull back this blessing, for all of us, that I would invite everyone to join me in. I will read it the first time, and then I'll invite Jimmy and then Nicole. You can, please follow, uh, and we'll do this together. in repeating this 3 times. And at the end of our third time, we can count down from 3 and invite everyone to use our breath one more time to either extinguish our candles, or if you want to let your light extinguish on its own accord, by all means. You don't need to blow out the light of the candle if you don't choose to, and or if you don't have a candle, feel free to breathe with us, as your breath will represent the nature of the prayer that we'll join in together. So by extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
So on the count of 3, breathe with me if so inclined. 3, 2, 1. So we've released that light and put this love back into the universe together. I know we're 1 minute over time so far in our time together, so don't want to hold anyone up who has to leave, who's been holding on to abide by the time we set. I would love to just share a little bit more gratitude, and Andy, if you want to share just the upcoming events that we have as just a close to this experience, and then we can let everyone go.
Sure. Jimmy, Nicole, thank you so much. Our next monthly COVID grief gathering is on July 11th. And this is a drop-in space for all those experiencing specific loss as a result of the pandemic. Please join us for that. Next slide, we've got Room for Grief on May 18th. Longtime Reimagine collaborator Christabeth Atwood will facilitate this gathering. It takes place every third Thursday of the month. And we hold space for those mourning all kinds of loss using art, creativity, and prompts. We are announcing tonight our next monthly thematic series. It's called Pain to Purpose, Redesigning Our Careers and Lives. There are pain points throughout our personal and professional lives, and there's a desire to feel like what we're doing achieves purpose, results, impact. So in this series, we'll be exploring how facing loss and adversity can shift our perspectives on work and life. We'll hear inspiring stories of individuals who have successfully transformed their lives and careers after experiencing hardship, adversity, and loss. Please join us for that. And finally, join us for our August Vigil on August 2nd. It will feature a conversation between author Simran Jeet Singh and Dr. Sharon Groves. Simran is executive director for the Aspen Institute's Religion and Society program. The conversation will focus on his inspiring new memoir, The Light We Give, How Sick Wisdom Can Transform Your Life.
Thank you so much, Andy. And as everyone can tell, we host a lot of free events at Reimagine to try to create spaces for this all types of loss, where people of different backgrounds can be together and feel safe, and for different points in the journey. The idea being that we create spaces to just be and to process, but also spaces where we can really start beginning that process of channeling. And we are working, which we'll share more about soon, on something we've been working on for the last 2 years, which is transforming all of our learnings into a safe social media space that actually moves people forward to actually begin that and showcase that real process of channeling and what that might mean. And so definitely would love to share more about that with all of you, and Nicole and Jimmy as well, whose wisdom we hold really at the highest esteem. And so, I did want to just, I often try to say thank you in some way, and I wrote a little poem for Nicole and Jimmy. This is called a 15. It's 5 lines and 3 syllables each. And really just wrote this as honestly as I was listening to both of you today. and change what I had here before. But it's your melodies shine, and so these are each line is three syllables. Unjust loss. You show us pain and love, love strong. Oh, it should be love so strong. That's love so strong, words and song. So thank you so much for being here and for what you're contributing to this community and to everyone who's not even here. You're honestly in what we'll do in the world because of this day. And thanks to the Reimagine staff, Zubin and Andy and Dara and Misha and who am I missing right now? Did I just say Zubin? I think I said Zubin. Did I miss somebody? Please, somebody tell me if I just missed somebody who's here. But anyway, all the great folks at Reimagine, and then to really all of you who attended. You really we're doing this for you and with you, and so thank you so much for stepping into the space with us. Wrote this little poem for all of us together on July 5th. Holiday, every day. Much depends on our bonds, dependence. So may we all be able to depend on one another as a source of inspiration and strength and courage and resolve and love, and may we be able to spread that idea to others that the more we can participate together in this type of transformation and open up these conversations and be there for one another and listen, so much as possible when we open our ears and our hearts to listening. So we'd love to hear more from you, Nicole and Jimmy, but maybe just one word from Nicole, one word from Jimmy, just the words you want to leave, just the one word you want to leave us with.
Care.
Gratitude.
Well, with care and gratitude, we bid you adieu and thank you for being with us. We'll see you all soon.